The guy's no threat. Those who are of the truth hear my voice. This is about truth. This is about thinking. This is about what people believe. So it's not an earthly type kingdom, and it's about what people believe. It's about what people think, and Pilate understands. He despairs of truth. He says, what is truth? There probably doesn't believe there is such a thing, but at the same time, he understands that they really don't have a charge against him. There is no guilt in him. And that's where we pick up. Let's look at chapter 18 and verse 38. John 18, verses 38 through 40. Jay, would you read that, please?
Pilate said to him, "What is the truth?" After he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber.
Okay, I want us to look at this next block of verses this way. This is where Pilate is shooting for some kind of leniency. He understands that this is kind of a Mickey Mouse kangaroo court kind of thing going on, and he makes an attempt for leniency. When you look at that 38th verse, he looks at the Jews and he says, "I find no guilt in him." Now, who does he represent? Pilate represents the might and power of... He's speaking for Rome. And if he stands before the Jews and says, "I find no guilt in him," you know now who has his ear. Whose side is he really on here? Jews' side or Jesus' side? He's just taking a stand against them and on Jesus' side. Now, if Rome says, "We think it's this way," are you going to be a little bit intimidated about saying, "Oh, no, we want to see it this way"? Is that an intimidation factor when the Roman governor says, "I don't see that this guy's guilty"? This is an effort. I find no guilt in this man. Now, the problem he's having to face here is that the Jews don't like him. And quite often they will go against him and be obnoxious and struggle against him simply because they do not like him. So while he is trying to intimidate them here, they're not going to buy into it. Yes?
Don't they sometimes also go over his head and make complaints?
Or threaten to. They're going to threaten to here. There were many reasons why Pilate did not get along with the Jews. And right here he's looking at them and saying, "You know what? I'm Rome's representative. I don't think he's guilty." But then in verses 39 and 40, let's look at this again. You have a custom. The custom is at the Passover, I release somebody you want. Why don't you just take Jesus? You want Jesus? Think about this for a moment. What is he trying to do? He is trying to pacify them, but let's put it this way. He's offering them a way out. Now, if you're in the midst of a commotion or a fight or a struggle or a disagreement, tactically, you want to win. But before the other guy's likely to back down, what does he need? He needs a way to save face. You offer him something that maybe it isn't exactly what they're wanting, but at least he can kind of back out of the situation gracefully. This is I don't think he's guilty. Rome doesn't think he's guilty. So why don't you just take him as the guy you normally would ask for, and everybody goes home and pretends this never happened. But that's not going to work either. They're just that hard-headed. That takes us to the next part, chapter 19, verses 1 through 5. Jimmy, would you read that? right, let's stop right there. This is a sympathy play. Here he's going to offer them partial satisfaction. They want him dead, but maybe they will be satisfied with a little bit less. Now, you'll notice that in the Gospel of John, John does not emphasize the suffering of Jesus like some of the other writers do. I don't mean he ignores it, but once again, it's like they already understand what Jesus went through, so he kind of minimizes the details in relation to some of the others. But let's look at verse 1. Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him. Most of us know what that involves. Okay, when you talk about a Roman scourging, what was involved in that? Or Jewish for that matter. What did they use? Pardon me?
Whip?
What kind of whip?
Sharp ends.
Probably a cat o' nine tails with little pieces of metal or bone attached to the ends. What's the purpose of the metal or the bone? To just rip you apart. Now, if they gave you 40 save one, I'm not sure exactly how the Romans did it, but these are Jewish people doing it. If they gave you 40 save one, what would be your likely condition when you were finished? Some people did not survive the beating. You were pretty much flayed. There was not much left on your back by the time they were done with that. The second verse, the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. You got the crown of thorns that was placed on his head. I went down to Arizona one time hunting. Tell you this about Arizona. You go out into the boondocks in Arizona, there isn't a bush they have that doesn't have a sticker on it that's about that long. Does it hurt to get jabbed with a thorn? Well, this is a crown of thorns placed on his head after being beaten. And they put a purple robe on him, and they began to come up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews." They mocked. Now, this is personal. Everybody probably understands this concept, have your own feelings toward it. But would you rather take a beating or be mocked? A lot of guys would rather take a beating. Mocking in and of itself is a painful thing, but if you're in this bad a condition, maybe you don't even hear it. And then he is slapped. Which is never going to be fun. Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you so that you may know I find no guilt in him." Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When he says, "Behold the man," what is he really doing? What's he trying to draw from them? Trying to draw what? Sympathy. Trying to draw sympathy. Okay, look how much I've already... Surely this is enough. Now, the problem here is he has a crowd with no sympathy. For a moment, keep your finger there, and let's go back to Luke 20. Parable of the vineyard. The landlord kept sending people to collect the rent. They kept killing the people that came to collect the rent. And finally the landlord said, "I'm going to send my son. They will reverence my son." And in verse 14, when the vine growers saw him, they reasoned with one another, saying, "This is the heir, let us kill him, so that the inheritance will be ours." All right, we have come to that moment. He is working to try to get Jesus off. He wants sympathy. There is no sympathy. And they will call for his life. But before that, let's look at verses 6 through 12. Who can I pick on here? Steve Bird, would you read that, please? John 19.
So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Take it yourself and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. And he entered into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You do not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you? I have authority to crucify you." Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, "You release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar."
Okay, it continues. Now, when we back up to the 6th verse, the chief priests and the officers are crying out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate says, "You crucify him yourselves." Well, we can't because we're under Roman law. But we have a law that says he made himself out to be the Son of God, so he needs to die. And all of a sudden, Pilate is afraid. Now, there's one little detail that Matthew brings out that might play into this. Does anybody know what his wife did about this time? Pilate's wife. Yeah, sent him a note. Says, "Don't have anything to do with this guy. I had a dream last night about this righteous man. Don't have anything to do with this guy." She sends the note. He hears the charge. The guy made himself out to be the Son of God. And suddenly he's rattled. He's afraid by it. Now, he's either afraid because he thinks maybe this is the reality of the situation, or, boy, this is really getting complicated and this could really hurt me politically. In the 9th verse, he entered into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" Jesus gave him no answer. Well, now, wait a minute. You got to talk to me. I'm the governor. 10th verse, Pilate said to him, "You do not speak to me? Do you not know I have authority to release you, and I have authority to crucify you?" His claim, "I have authority. Don't you know I'm in charge here?" And boy, that really intimidated Jesus, didn't it? The 11th verse. Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above." Now just picture that in your mind. You have been going through all of this, and the governor says, "You need to talk to me. I have authority here." And Jesus says, "No, you don't." The first clause there, somebody boil that down into a little different words. You'd have no authority over me unless it had been given to you by heaven. You're not really in charge here. This is from heaven. God's in charge. Heaven's in charge. You're just a role player here. Yes.
He's also admitting that he does have authority, but it's delegated.
Yeah. Yeah, you think it's you, but nope, here's you. And really, when you get right down to it, the way Jesus answered that question, you do have authority, it's delegated authority, but who is really calling the shots? If God didn't want to allow this to happen, it wasn't going to happen. You think of the position that he is in. At this point in time, does he really want to be in this position? Does Pilate want to be in the position he's in? This is the biggest all-time why me moment for a political figure. Okay, if I say a why me moment, what am I talking about? A why me moment for a politician.
Why is this happening to me? Right?
See,
Can't this thing happen to someone else? I don't want to do this.
Herbert Hoover wins the presidency. And then what happens in 1929? I know none of you were there. But Herbert Hoover won the presidency in 1928, and then in 1929, the stock market crashed, and we went into what? The Great Depression. That's a why me moment. It's a, okay, I got my dream, I became president, and why did this have to happen on my watch? Or you take Jimmy Carter. What's his big why me moment? The Ayatollah Khomeini kidnaps over 400 Americans and everything just goes downhill. Is it uncommon for politicians to have why me moments? This is the biggest. I mean, Pilate did not ask for this. It comes to him because he happens to be the governor that Rome sent. So, in other words, his situation is imposed on him because of his position. This is imposed on him. Now, he may be the right man. God may have put him in that position because he was the right man at the right time, but he never asked for this. He's there. It's imposed on him as opposed to somebody else. Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." Who delivered him? I was playing with this. Sometimes you get to looking at things, you get a little too cute. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. What if, when he says, he who delivered, what if that stands for the entire Jewish nation?
Or Judas.
Pardon?
Or Judas.
Yeah, that's the deal, because when it says the one, and if you look at it in the original language, the ho is just the one. So we do seem to be talking about Judas, the guy who delivered me has a, greater sin than you. Now, why would that be? Why would we look at Pilate and Judas and say, Judas is worse? His problem is imposed on him. He didn't ask for it. How about Judas? Judas compromised his position. It wasn't imposed on him. He went out and asked for it. In a sense, Pilate, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. You got your why me moment. Now, you're the guy for the job because God knows how we all will react under situations, but you never asked for it. This guy did. He walked right into it. Any comments? Yes.
I tend to think that Pilate's position was difficult on many levels. If we look like in our current history, we look back to the 90s and we see O.J. Simpson trial. Judge Ito was put over it. That was potentially career-making case, but He's saying, you're going to do what you're going to do, and this is not really up to you. He knows, and all that's throwing red flags to Pilate. He's like, something's not right here. His wife's coming to him and saying, hey, there's something not quite right here. You need to not deal with this. He can't really win. He's either going to violate his conscience and do what is wrong, and he's got to live with that decision, or he's got to potentially put himself in a position where he's going to upset the Jews, and they might take Jesus out and kill him anyway. So there's not really anything he can do here to stop it without jeopardizing his future.
Is there such a thing as a no-win situation for a politician? Is there such a thing as a no-win situation for all of us? What do you do if you're in a no-win situation? You just do what's right. And this is where Pilate failed. Yes?
This reminds me of the situation where the Apostle Paul was, the Jews were trying to kill the Apostle Paul after he come back from the third journey. But Claudius Lysias was a different kind of man. He took Paul out of that mob, and he rescued him.
Yep. And the fact that he did that is pretty much a testimony against Pilate. Now, Pilate knows what he's dealing with, but at this point in time, it's almost like maybe Pilate has what it takes to stand up to the crowd, because he does it at other times. But then we get to, the real kicker. We get to the real charge, and somebody throws out just the right words. In the 12th verse, the 12th verse. As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar. We have just the right words. He wants to release Jesus. And then they throw out this idea, okay, if you're a friend of Jesus, you're no friend of Caesar, because Jesus is obviously a what? He's an insurrectionist. He's against Rome. He elevates himself to kingship. So he can't be a friend of Caesar. So if you're a friend of Jesus, you cannot be a friend of Caesar. You must be an enemy of Caesar. Now, to whom is Pilate beholden for his position? Rome. To Caesar. Can he afford to dirty his resume? No. So he has to be on board. I'm going to have to be on board with this, though I know it's a lie, in self-preservation, so nobody says anything terrible about me. I'm going to have to go along. Okay. In what year was political correctness invented? We've been speaking about it for about 20 years now, but was political correctness invented in our lifetime? That's essentially what this is. I've got to go along with this even though I know it's a lie. I've got to act like it's not a lie, or I'm going to be in trouble. I don't want anybody pointing a finger at me saying, I believe the wrong thing. So we're going to have to take care of Jesus. Now, Pilate did all of these things because he knew Jesus was not guilty. He made efforts for leniency, and then he crumbled. Verses 13 through 15, chapter 19. Todd, would you read that, please? Yes, I did.
When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat and placed him at the stone pavement, which is Aramaic in Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of Passover week, about the 6th hour. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews. They shouted, take him away, crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no kings of Caesar. The chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified.
Okay, let's back up here. Formal sentencing. About the 6th hour, preparation of the Passover. Obviously, we are linking Jesus to the Passover. He is the Passover lamb. And Pilate says, shall I crucify your king? We have no king but Caesar. Why is that such a hypocritical statement? We have no king but Caesar. What did they really think about Caesar? What did the Jews feel about Caesar?
They really thought that their only king was God and Caesar was nothing.
They hated Caesar's guts. Any given day, they were probably thinking about, boy, we're hoping for Messiah will get here because we really do truly want to get rid of these Roman guys. They hated the Romans. And now they're saying, he's our king. On any other day but this day, had you walked down the street in Jerusalem and said to your typical Jewish guy, who's your king? What would their answer have been? God is our king. But today, we have no king but Caesar. Now, keep your finger there. There's an Old Testament passage you might look at. It's one that when commentators look at it, and they say, what exactly does this mean? I believe there's a connection between what we're seeing in Zechariah chapter 11 and what we're reading about here. Zechariah 11 is a prophecy of the flock of the slaughter, the doomed flock that Zechariah was to take care of. And it's just almost too detailed to get into too much of it right now, but if you look at the 8th verse, rather the 7th verse, so I pastured the flock doomed to slaughter, hence the afflicted of the flock. And I took for myself 2 staffs. The one I called favor, and the other I called union, and I pastured the flock. Then I annihilated the 3 shepherds in 1 month, for my soul was impatient with them, and their soul was weary of me. Then I said, I will not pasture you. What is to die, let it die. What is to be annihilated, let it be annihilated. And let those who are left eat one another's flesh. I took my staff, favor, and cut it in pieces to break my covenant which I had made with all the peoples. So it was broken on that day, and thus the afflicted of the flock who were watching me realized that it was the word of the Lord. I said to them, if it is good in your sight, give me my wages, and if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. Then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price at which I was valued by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them to the potter in the house of the Lord. All right, when you look at this particular incident, the flock of the slaughter, the breaking of the rods, the shepherd's rods. Is there a connection here with the death of Jesus in this passage? The 30 pieces of silver has to do with what? Has to do with Judas and the payment he took for the death of Jesus. What we see in Zechariah chapter 11 is a breaking of a relationship. When we come over to this passage and the things that Jesus was saying just before he died, in Matthew he had spoken to the Jewish leaders and said, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bringing forth the fruits of it. There's going to be a change. National Israel was not going to hold the position that they once held. A relationship was going to be broken, and the relationship going forward would be the relationship in Jesus. Now, in this passage here, this seems, and the second I say seems, you say speculation, yeah. But when these guys stand up and say, we have no king but Caesar, pow. Yes.
In the prison system, inmates go through the debriefing process, and they have to cross a certain line.
Because all of them will tell you a little bit of information,
Yeah.
I think this whole thing is, he was pressing them to see how far they're going to go. Where are they going to go? How serious are they about this? And when they finally admitted that Caesar is their king, I think right then and there was game over, all in. Nothing else to do.
Yeah.
They were committed.
Yeah. And that statement, from his point of view, from Pilate's point of view, he doesn't like what's happening, but it has to give him a little bit of glee to hear that. You just forfeited the game. Let's go back to the text. Pardon me? None of this makes God happy, but it is the plan for the good of mankind. In 16 through 22, so he handed him over to them to be crucified. They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 other men, one on either side, and Jesus in between. Let me erase this. Now you'll notice again, economy of words with the Apostle John. They took him out and they crucified him. I mean, that's quick. The single most significant thing that ever happened in the history of the entire world is told in just a few words. They take him out, they crucify him. First, he bears the cross. Okay, a cross has to be heavy enough to suspend your body weight, which tells you what? Can it be a stick? A little stick? Say if I had 2 sticks like this and made a cross out of it, would that hold up my body weight? All right, the fact that it will hold up my body weight tells me what about its weight? It is significant, and he's going to have to carry this cross. Now, having gone through all of that, how easy is it going to be to carry this cross? You are going to stagger under the load so much that he will have to be helped before he gets to where he's going. He bears his cross and he is crucified. We don't have a lot of detail about the crucifixion. In this passage, does it tell us whether or not he was nailed or tied to the cross? Does it say? Later in the book of John, we're going to know he was nailed because Thomas is going to say, I'm going to have to put my hand there or I'm not going to believe it. But this passage doesn't say when the Romans crucified you, they could either tie you to the cross or nail you to the cross or nail you and tie you to the cross. If you say, well, if I get my choice, I want to be tied to the cross. What's the problem with that? It draws out your death a lot longer. Some have speculated, I've told you this before, I'm going to tell you again because I think it's significant. I've heard commentators, read commentators writing, saying, well, you know what? When they crucified Jesus, they couldn't have driven the nails through the palms of his hands because when they lifted the cross up, it would tear through and it wouldn't work. Well, the problem is sometimes they tied you, sometimes they nailed you, sometimes they tied you and nailed you. And as far as whether or not the palm of your hand will support body weight without tearing through, weird thing, I'm sitting in a dentist office. National Geographic sitting there, and on the cover of the magazine there's a picture drawn when, I The Mongols tried to invade Japan. Long, long time ago. Drew a picture. The Mongols tried to invade Japan, and one of their ships, they captured a bunch of Japanese prisoners and they were taking them back. They pierced their hands with knives and ran a rope through their knives and hung them all off the side of a ship. And they're taking them back. Which tells me something. A commentator that says, you know, your hand won't hold the body weight. Well, we might assume that. But some people have actually tried it. So I'm not too sure. That's not what you'd call decisive proof, but when you're sitting there looking at the picture of people hanging off the side of a ship like that, it makes you wonder. Yes?
I would also imagine that Jesus and the apostles' primary mode of transportation being walking, they weren't built like most Americans are today. Which probably would have aided.
A little stouter? Are you trying to say, yeah, they'd hold a little more. And, you know, we are aware what crucifixion was. They would nail you to the cross. There was a little knob in the middle of it for you to sit on that you could almost sit on. And what was the purpose of that? Was it for your comfort? Keep you alive a little bit longer so you could suffer more. There wasn't anything about it that was designed for your comfort. It was to stretch you out, to make you live in misery until you finally died. Now, he does not belabor that in John chapter 19. Less details. Now, we'll pick up there next week.